Good morning, everybody. If you saw my last video about how to play a Warlock with all the different mechanics and how the spell power scaling works and some of the different effects, then you probably have a decent grasp on, what items you should be equipping and what things you need to be doing while playing your character to be successful in combat. Warlock is something that once you actually know how the math comes together and at least where your damage and your strength and your stats are coming from, then you're able to kind of just go along with it and really learn as you go. However, I wanted to make sure I explained the way that I like to play Warlock and the way that I use it easily for leveling, so that way, if you're out there and you're still not sure, you have the ability to quickly check out a guide or have a point of reference. So this character build is essentially how I build basically every single Warlock for the purposes of leveling, and while there are many different ways to play Warlock, this is just the way that I like to do it. For starters, I like making sure I pick the Great Old One Pact. It gives you access to the spell-like ability Knock, which is fantastic because it means that you can just crack open doors or treasure chests whenever you feel like it, getting more optional experience and sometimes getting some more treasure as well. It's also Acid, which means that you don't have to worry about damage reduction on different types of monsters from elemental damage usually, with arcane oozes and clay golems being the distinct exceptions. While Fire can be better because you get access to Hurl Through Hell, it is not entirely necessary to have while you're playing through this character. If you're planning on going to endgame, of course you should definitely take Fire because Hurl Through Hell is better, and you're more than likely going to have a sorcerer in your group who will be stripping the fire immunity off of monsters for you. However, if you're not planning on doing that and you're like me and you're just going to burn through a quick life to get rid of halfling lives because you don't want to play your halfling life, then Great Old One is the one I would recommend. In terms of the actual blast shape, I personally prefer Cone. Cone is easy because you just direct it, you know exactly what the monsters that you're going to hit are, unlike Chain, which sometimes will bounce to targets that you don't want to kill first. With Cone, you can just always ensure that you're hitting a large quantity of monsters. It also hits everything in front of you, allowing you to be very, very quick at deleting large packs of monsters, and it absolutely destroys breakables, so I love it. Warlock is fast, Warlock is easy, and Warlock is going to take you through the easiest past lives of your life. It's not as fast as Sorcerer. While Sorcerer is faster, it's not as defensive, doesn't get as much use magic device, and sometimes you might run out of mana and need to shrine, versus a Warlock where you pretty much will never shrine. Just never, it's not going to happen. So let me give it up to me to show you how to create this character for yourself. So how do you build yourself a fantastic Warlock that can just clear through the whole game? Well, here's how you do it. You play a halfling. Not really. What you do instead is you focus on... Oops. I'm pressing all the wrong buttons because I'm nervous. Warlock. You focus on charisma. It's kind of like the bread and butter stat, and you want to make sure you max this as much as possible, with Constitution being your second stat. One of the benefits of Warlock is that really the rest of the stats don't do anything. Sure, there are some things in the Warlock tree that actually scale off of intelligence, but they also scale off of charisma, and I have zero idea why they even scale off of intelligence in the first place. So charisma is going to be kind of your main goal, your bread and butter, and this is what you're going to want to be working towards. It increases your DCs, it increases your spell points. It's very, very essential. After that, the focus skills that I decided to take were Intimidate, Spellcraft, Use Magic Device, and Haggle. Depending on your amount of skills that you have, or any tomes or anything, Use Magic Device is number 1, with Spellcraft being number 2. Intimidate, just because I had extra points, I decided to go with Intimidate because, hey, sometimes it's nice to be able to pull monsters to you instead of towards or to other people. And then I took Haggle because you get to save money and get some good prices. Big fan of good prices. As far as the feats go and the progression, the first thing you're going to do right away is grab Metamagic Feats. Now this might seem kind of confusing, but one of the reasons you're grabbing Metamagic Feats quickly is because Quicken Spell will allow you to make sure all your buffs, all your defensive spells go off without a hitch. And this is essential since, one, I'm not putting any points in concentration, and Quicken Spells don't have to worry about concentration. But on top of that, Quicken Spell, you're never really going to run out of spell points, especially during the leveling process. Generally, Warlocks only have defensive spells and not offensive spells. So Entangle or Web or any other defensive spell that you can think of, you want to quicken so you can get them down right away and prevent monsters from hitting you. And then Maximize and Empower are going to affect all of your spell-like abilities that you have. So you want to grab these right away. The reason for this is because every single Warlock, regardless of the kind that you play, has a bunch of spell-like abilities. Whether you're using Consume or Stricken, or Eldritch Wave, or Eldritch Ball, or Eldritch Burst and Eldritch Blast, or Spirit Blast, all of those things are spell-like abilities. All of those things can use your Metamagic Feats to gain additional damage. So that's kind of what I would go for feats. And then after that, you can take literally whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Since I have a whole bunch of past lives, I did end up taking Arcane Initiate to the Wizard past life, which gives +1 to all DCs, and Completionist, because it gives +2 intelligence, or sorry, +2 charisma, which is effectively +1 to all DCs. And then after that, I had no idea what to take, so I took a bunch of spellcasting feats. I took Spell Focus, Enchantment, and Evocation, because it seemed good enough, but honestly, it doesn't matter. As far as your Warlock Pact, for the purposes of leveling quickly, I like to take Acid or the Great Old One. This is because you get knock for extra treasure while leveling, and on top of that it does acid damage, which most of the time monsters are going to be taking full damage from it anyway. So that's kind of the way you want to work on the feats. As far as your spells are concerned, you don't get a huge option or a bunch of options for selecting spells as a Warlock. So I kind of went in this structure, starting it with Expeditious Retreat and then Night Shield. You want to make sure you have Night Shield before you enter in Reaper mode, because magic missiles kill you every single time, and Expeditious Retreat is just for moving around. If you can get yourself a speed item, you can swap out Expeditious Retreat for jump at any given time, but I never picked up a speed item, so I just used Expeditious Retreat all the way up to level 20. Blur is what you're going to start with next as your second level spells, and then there's no other good spells, so I just took Invisibility. After that, into the third level, I took Dimension Door because it's good for quick recalls and getting out of quests fast, which is great when you're leveling, and then Displacement because it's one of the most defensive spells you can pick up in the game, giving you a 50% miss chance on all attacks that are incoming. After that, you want to be picking up Evard's Black Tentacles as your first 4th level spell. This is kind of like the bread and butter of Warlock, and a spell that is so powerful, I am baffled that this hasn't made its way out of Warlock into the actual traditional spellcasters of Sorcerer and Wizard, who learned this spell in the 3.5 handbook. So I'm not entirely sure what that's about, but this is insanely good. It grabs everybody. Make sure you take Evard's right away and cast it all the time. You will not regret it. As far as the 5th level spells go, there's some options here. I opted to go with Finger of Death just because every once in a while you throw a Finger of Death, it lands, it's kind of helpful. Sometimes when there's a guy on a ledge or like a spellcaster you don't want to deal with, it's kind of nice. I also took Teleport and Greater Teleport for moving around. Again, you could take the spot defensive spell, but I like teleports because it is convenient. And then for 6 levels, I started with Mass Hold Monster, and then my second spell being Trap the Soul. Mass Hold Monster is just great. You're going to cast it all the time, throwing it onto packs, freezing guys. Really, really useful. It's one of the best spells in all of DDO. You get it 15 or 15 too, or 15 or 16? I think it's 15. No, it's 16. You get it 16. Very, very good spell. Unbelievably good. It's actually the second person to get Mass Hold Monster. Bards get it at 12, Warlocks get it at 16, and Wizards at 17. And then Trap the Soul. This spell is really weird. I use it just because it is a high DC will save instant kill. So if you're fighting monsters with low will saves like ogres, you just destroy them when you're playing through the content. And usually Trap the Soul has a spell component, but the Warlock version doesn't have a spell component. So you can just cast Trap the Soul whenever you want, on whoever you want, and insta kill them and pick up a whole heap and help in a soul gems, which is cool. Now, as far as enhancements go, ignore the halfling part because this doesn't really matter. What matters is just your basic enhancements. I use Soul Eater and Tainted Scholar primarily. If you want to give yourself a bit of an easier time but a little bit slower, instead of putting your points into Soul Eater like I did, you keep exactly the same points in Tainted Scholar, but you move all these points into Enlightened Spirit, picking up all of the defensive stuff around the aura, so that way you can get the extra light damage from Spiritual Retribution on all of your attacks, picking up Eldritch Burst, picking up Spirit Blast, and most importantly, Shining Through, which is a button that when you click it, you basically get an infinite amount of temporary hit points that lasts for, it says 10 minutes, and you can press this every 30 seconds to give yourself a huge amount of temporary hit points based on your constitution. It's very, very powerful. Also, if you like saving spell points, which you don't need to, you can take the Displacement spell-like ability, although again, you don't need to, but you could if you want. As well as then getting, of course, Celestial Spirit and all the other stuff, a bunch of extra health while wearing medium armor, and of course the ability to wear medium armor in general. I personally went for the Soul Eater route because the Soul Eater route is a little bit faster for leveling. Soul Eater allows you to get Cone, which is nice. It's a little bit better than Chain. Chain, if you're deciding to use Enlightened Spirit, you want to take Chain, but if you're going with Soul Eater, you want to go with Cone because it gives you more damage, and it breaks barrels and boxes and crates, giving you all that little bit of extra XP as you go around. As far as the individual choices within the tree, the reason I take these points in Tainted Scholar, the extra health from Faint Health is kind of nice, gives you that extra temporary hit points just whenever you cast a spell on yourself. So for very minor self-healing and sustain, you can throw out a basic spell like Featherfall, hits yourself and the entire group, giving everybody temporary hit points equal to your charisma, which is usually pretty high since you're playing as a Warlock. The pact damage is a no-brainer. This just gives you additional pact damage. You want to make sure you're picking up the cores, and you want to make sure you're grabbing Underdark Blast, because this character scales a lot of light damage, whether you play as a Soul Eater or as an Enlightened Spirit as your main core ability set. Soul Eater granting a lot of chaotic damage, which scales off of light spell power, or Enlightened Spirit, which just scales straight up off of light spell power because it's got light spells. And then Underdark Blast making your damage evil, so it scales off of light spell power. The only time you wouldn't really use this is if you're playing as a Tainted Scholar for max DPS, which is when you would want to take Penetrating Blast. You get extra base damage as well as turning your force damage into piercing, which scales off of force damage, so you don't really want to use Underdark Blast, although you have to take it anyway. It's neither here nor there. So yeah, I grab Stricken, I grab Consume, because it gives me lots of damage. You want to make sure you're picking up Feeding Frenzy. Feeding Frenzy is great, because even if you don't strike a target with Stricken or Consume, you still get 1% increased movement speed, so you just kind of throw it out, and even if it doesn't connect at a monster, you still get the extra movement speed. Very, very useful. And then you grab Cone, and the rest of the stuff just kind of writes itself. Grab the cores. Stricken, you want to grab Stricken Soul because it makes monsters weaker. You get vulnerability, you get extra damage when you're Stricken Consume, extra damage Stricken Consume, and then the tier 5s, you grab everything. Eldritch Wave because it just does a ton of damage, and it's a very short cooldown. You can throw it out all the time and throw on your spell-like abilities, or your meta magic feats because it is a spell-like ability. Feed on magic, I actually took this last because I found I never ran out of spell points. If you start running out of spell points, you can consider taking this sooner, where basically it gives you temporary spell points whenever you use an Eldritch Blast. Spell Tearing for some extra crit, and then a Finger of Death spell-like ability, so I had the spell and the spell-like ability, so I could Finger of Death people whenever I felt like it. So that's kind of the gist of it. Again, if you're going into Enlightened Spirit, you want to be taking the Spiritual Retribution stuff up here. Generally, I would take 1 point into Resist Energies, because it's all of the resistances for 1 point. It costs you 60 spell points at the beginning of an adventure, but then you're guaranteeing you're not dying to Melt's Acid Arrow, or Burning Blood, or some other unfortunate spell. Then you can also grab the Power of Enlightenment. This is an extremely cheap way to get a lot of spell power. So these 3 points is 3 points for 21 light spell power and 3 points for 21. That's a very, very high amount of light spell power for a very inefficient, or not inefficient, but very cheap cost. And then lastly, you could take Brilliance, but this is temporary hit points based on your Constitution if you have your Aura running. Generally, while leveling, you won't be using the Aura. You'll be using your Eldritch Blast for the leveling purpose. I always recommend using Blast while leveling. The Aura, maybe when you get to Epics, or if you make a more melee-focused Warlock, you could consider using the Aura, but for the purpose of speed, you're always going to be blasting as you fly around, whether you're using Enlightened Spirit or Soul Eater as your main tree. The one reason why you don't want to use Tainted Scholar as your main tree is because while you do get a bunch of extra damage, you don't really get any good defenses. You're not picking up the extra move speed out of Soul Eater. You're not picking up the temporary hit points out of Shining Through. And that's kind of a problem. So Tainted Scholar, while it is fun to use as a primary tree in the endgame, and it is fun to use while leveling, it's not the strongest leveling tree versus Soul Eater or Enlightened Spirit that gets you some better points. Now, as far as how you should spend your points, where you should start first, I usually go into Tainted Scholar and grab Chain as quickly as I can, and then keep points in Tainted Scholar until about level 4-ish. And then once you've got 16 points that you're able to spend willy-nilly, by the end of level 4, that's when you want to go into Soul Eater, you want to grab some Stricken, you want to grab the Feeding Frenzy, and you want to grab Cone, and then Cone is 12 points spent in the tree. With 12 points spent in the Soul Eater tree, you've still got 4 left, so you can pick up Strong Pact, having a little bit of Pact damage still on there, so you're able to knock guys down as you're doing your spell casting and your spell questing. And then after you've got all these points spent at the end of level 4, that's when you want to fill up your Pact damage, and you want to get all the way about up to here. Again, this is going to be another 12 points, so you'll have 12 points spent in Soul Eater and 12 points spent in Tainted Scholar by the time you're level 6. That's total 24, how many points you have at 6, as well as making sure you take Underdark Blast along this process. Once you hit level 7, make sure you're picking up your cores to get immunity to fear, as well as Stanch for temporary hit points whenever you want. It gives you, cost depravity, which is just what you get by hitting people with your Eldritch Blast, and then you can get temporary hit points all the time. But once you've got 12 points in, or 13 points in here, getting the Strong Pact, grabbing the Underdark Blast and the Stanch, it's then up to you how you want to progress. I personally went and picked up 1 in Scroll Mastery, so I had a total of 16 points spent in Tainted Scholar, and then I picked up everything in Soul Eater and then came back. Although, if you don't really care too much about 1 in Scroll Mastery, if you're playing on Elite difficulty, if you have hirelings or friends who are healing you, you don't really need to worry too much about this, and you can just go straight into Soul Eater instead, depending on how you're spending your points. There are a couple of things that are I don't recommend for leveling, one of the which is Steel Lifeforce. When I first saw this ability, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. You deal damage and you heal. It's awesome. Except it scales off healing spell power, and you usually don't have any of that as a Warlock, which is unfortunate. And on top of that, the healing doesn't come from the monster, it comes from you. Once you cast this ability, whether it hits or not, you get the heal. So it's 12d6 healing on a 20-second cooldown, which sounds kind of cool, but once you read the meta magics, you can't maximize it, you can't empower it, which would be the majority of where your spell power is going to be coming from. And since you can't do that, it's not actually hitting that hard. It's about 1/3 the strength of Stricken, which you're already casting for damage, so this isn't very good at all. And on top of that, the healing comes from you, so if you're in Reaper mode, it gets reduced by 60%. Not great. So you definitely don't want to be using that to start. And that's basically it. And then once your character gets to level 20, from 20 to 30, it plays exactly the same way. So you don't really have to make any changes or adjustments. So if you already know how to play your character, that's all you got to do. As far as gearing goes, I don't have any items right now because I was trying to reincarnate erroneously. But the main gear that you're looking for is anything that's going to be bumping your charisma, anything that's going to be bumping your constitution, because charisma is your mana, your DCs and your spells, everything else. Constitution is, of course, your health. And then managing your spell power. You want acid spell power, light spell power, acid crit, light crit. That's pretty much it. That's all you're going to be needing on a character like this. So that's pretty much all I have for you for this basic build. This is how you want to play Warlock for the purposes of quickly leveling and getting through all the way to the end game content. Or if you're just trying to do past lives, you want to burn through halfling lives, Warlock, or not Warlock lives, I guess. You got some, deep gnome lives you want to burn through. Doesn't matter. Just throw in some Warlock, do some of this, and you'll be through it in no time. As far as playing a real endgame Warlock build, we will be approaching the endgame Warlock build. I need to get a couple more racial points because I want to super duper max out and know what the real endgame looks like. But we will be looking at major DPS Warlock when I have the opportunity. I don't know exactly when that's going to be because Alchemist is coming out soon, and that throws a wrench in the plans. But there is a plan for a Tainted Scholar Warlock to see what is the real maximum DPS you can get when you get all the way there. Anyway, you guys, thank you for watching. So I hope you all had a great time. If you have any questions, leave me a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you all in the next video. Because I'm outside your window. I'm looking at you. Quick, look out your window. I'm right there. And then that's when you cut. That's when you cut away. You cut away like a creep. It's great.